Some secrets are not buried in the ground. They are buried in time. For 40 years, the snow fell on the open fields of Castle Rock, Colorado. Seasons changed. Detectives retired. The world moved on. But the evidence waited. In 1980, a young woman named Helene vanished into the winter night. Her case went cold. Ice cold. The killer thought he had outrun the law. He lived a full life. He grew old. He felt safe. But he didn't know that the future was coming for him. He didn't know that 40 years later, a simple paper cup would wake up the ghosts of the past. Let us travel back to January 1980. Castle Rock was a quiet town then, a place where people didn't lock their doors. Helene was 21 years old. She had just moved there to start her dream job as a radio intern. She was bright, kind, and full of life. On the evening of January 16th, she finished her shift at the radio station. She took the bus home. She got off at her usual stop. It was a short walk to her aunt's house, just across an open field. But she never made it to the front door. The next morning, her body was found in that snowy field. The police were baffled. There were footprints, but the wind was already erasing them. There were no witnesses, no weapon. They collected what they could. A piece of fabric, a biological sample. But in 1980, DNA technology didn't exist. The evidence was placed in a cardboard box, labeled, and put on a shelf in the evidence locker. The detectives worked day and night. They interviewed hundreds of people, but the trail went cold. The snow melted, but the mystery remained frozen. Years turned into decades. 1990 passed. 2000 passed. 2010 passed. The original detectives grew old. Some passed away, haunted by the one case they couldn't solve. The killer was out there. He was living a normal life. He married. He had a job. He drove a truck. He probably thought about that night less and less as the years went on. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. But in the background, science was evolving. The Golden State Killer was caught using something called Genetic Genealogy. And in 2019, the cold case unit in Colorado decided to open the cardboard box again. They took the preserved DNA sample from 1980. They didn't just run it through the police database. They had done that for years with no matches. This time, they uploaded it to a public genealogy website, the kind people use to find their distant cousins. They didn't find the killer. They found his third cousins. Two genealogists sat in a quiet room, building a massive family tree backwards, branch by branch, name by name. They narrowed it down from thousands of people to one specific family line, and finally, to one specific name, James. He had lived in Castle Rock in 1980, but now he was living a quiet life in sunny Florida. The detectives flew to Florida. They couldn't just arrest him. They needed proof. They needed his DNA to match the sample from the snow. They watched him. They watched him mow his lawn. They watched him go to the grocery store. They needed something he touched, something he discarded. For days, they waited. The tension was suffocating. And then he went to a bar. He ordered a beer. He drank it. He left the mug on the table. But the detectives couldn't get to it in time before the waitress washed it. Another day passed. Finally, James went to a coffee shop. He ordered a coffee in a paper cup. He sat outside, enjoying the Florida sun, completely unaware that 40 years of history were watching him from a parked car. He finished the coffee. He walked to a trash can. He threw the cup away. As soon as he drove off, the detectives moved in. They retrieved the cup. They flew it back to the lab. The forensic scientist compared the DNA on the rim of the coffee cup with the DNA found in the snowy field in 1980. It was a perfect match. The probability was 1 in a trillion. The police knocked on his door in Florida. James was confused. He was an old man now. When they told him they were from Castle Rock, Colorado, the color drained from his face. The ghost of 1980 had finally walked through his front door. The case is closed. The box is put away for good. Justice took the scenic route, but it arrived. The snow falls on Castle Rock tonight, but the field is peaceful. There are no more secrets hidden in the white. We leave pieces of ourselves everywhere we go. A fingerprint, a hair, a breath. But sometimes we leave something more personal. In 1984, a killer in a quiet Vermont town thought he was smarter than the police. He didn't just commit a crime. He taunted them. He sent a letter. He thought the letter was a symbol of his power. He sealed the envelope. He licked the stamp, and he dropped it in a mailbox. He didn't know it then, but in that split second, the simple act of licking a stamp, he had signed his own confession. It just took 35 years for science to read it. Let us travel to the autumn of 1984, to the Green Mountain State. Sarah Miller was a beloved schoolteacher in the town of Bennington. She lived in a Victorian house on a hill, surrounded by maple trees. It was a time before smart locks and cameras. People left their windows cracked open to let in the crisp October air. On the morning of October 4th, Sarah didn't show up for class. The police found her in her home. It was a tragedy that shattered the town's innocence. But what made the case terrifying wasn't just the crime. It was what happened 2 weeks later. The local newspaper received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a typed note. It contained details about the crime scene that only the killer could know. It was mocking the police for their lack of leads. The detectives analyzed the paper. They analyzed the typewriter font. They dusted for fingerprints, but the paper was clean. The killer had worn gloves. They had nothing. The letter was filed away in a plastic sleeve, labeled correspondence, and placed in a cardboard box in the basement of the police station. The case went cold. The maple trees shed their leaves 35 times. The town grew. Sarah was remembered only in old yearbooks. Life moved on. The killer, a man named William, stayed in the area for a few years, then moved south. He lived a quiet life. He worked in construction. He retired. He watched the news. He saw how technology was catching criminals, but he felt safe. Why? Because he had never been arrested. His DNA wasn't in any criminal database. He was a ghost, a man with no record. He assumed that because he wore gloves that day in 1984, he had left nothing behind. But he forgot about the stamp. In 2019, a cold case detective named Vance decided to review the Miller file. He wasn't looking for fingerprints. He was looking for biology. He pulled the old letter out of the evidence locker. He didn't look at the letter itself. He looked at the stamp. An old 20-cent stamp with an American flag. In 1984, you had to lick stamps to make them stick. Vance knew that saliva contains epithelial cells from the tongue, DNA, but the stamp had been stuck there for 3 decades. Was the glue still holding the secret? He sent the envelope to a specialized private lab. They didn't peel the stamp off. That would destroy it. They used a microsteam process to loosen the edge, just enough to scrape a few microscopic cells from underneath. They extracted a DNA profile, but when they ran it through the FBI database, Cody's, no match. William had never been arrested. He wasn't in the system. So they turned to the new weapon, Genetic Genealogy. They uploaded the killer's DNA to a public ancestry database. They found a match. Not the killer, but a second cousin. A woman living in Ohio who had just taken a DNA test to find out her heritage. The genealogists built a family tree. They went back to the great-grandparents and worked their way down, branch by branch, excluding people by age and location. They narrowed it down to 3 brothers who lived in Vermont in the 80s. 2 were dead. 1 was alive. William. Detectives found William living in a retirement community in Florida. He was 72 years old. They couldn't arrest him on a family tree alone. They needed a direct match. They surveilled his house. On a Tuesday morning, William took out his trash. He tied the white bag and left it on the curb. As soon as he went inside, the detectives grabbed the bag. Inside, they found a discarded soda can. They rushed it to the lab. The DNA on the soda can match the DNA under the stamp from 1984. When the police knocked on his door, William was watching TV. He looked confused. He thought it was a noise complaint. When they mentioned Bennington, 1984, the confusion turned to shock. He hadn't thought about that letter in 20 years. He thought the envelope was just paper. He didn't realize he had mailed his own DNA to the police, and they had kept it safe for him, waiting for the science to catch up. The letter is now evidence in a closed trial. The autumn leaves continue to fall in Vermont, covering the ground in red and gold. The seasons change, but the truth remains constant. It waits. It survives. Rain washes away many things. It washes away dust. It washes away footprints. But there are some things the rain cannot touch. In the misty suburbs of Seattle, a mystery hung over the city for 32 years. A shadow had moved through the night in 1986, leaving behind a tragedy that broke a family. The police collected the evidence, but the technology to read it didn't exist yet. The killer remained a ghost. He walked among the living. He grew older. He watched the city change. He thought the rain had washed his sins away. But he was wrong. 3 decades later, his fate wouldn't be sealed by a witness or a weapon. It would be sealed by a crumpled napkin, left on a table in a crowded restaurant. Let us travel back to a rainy night in 1986. Tacoma, Washington, just south of Seattle. It was a safe neighborhood. Parks, schools, pine trees. Jennifer, a bright 12-year-old girl, went for a bike ride in the local park. She never came home. The community searched for weeks. The rain made it difficult. When they finally found her, the grief was overwhelming. The police found something near the scene, a biological sample. But in 1986, DNA profiling was science fiction. They stored the sample carefully. They froze it, waiting for a future that could understand it. The 80s ended. The 90s came and went. The internet was born. The detective in charge of the case retired, but he kept a photo of Jennifer on his desk. The killer was out there. He wasn't a drifter. He was a local. He lived a normal life. He paid his taxes. He drove a sedan. He probably drove past the park every day, thinking he had committed the perfect crime. The case went cold. The files gathered dust. But science moves faster than criminals. In 2018, everything changed. Investigators decided to try a new technique, genetic genealogy. They took the frozen DNA sample from 1986. They built a digital profile. They didn't look for the killer directly. They looked for his relatives. They found 2 second cousins who had uploaded their DNA to a genealogy site to learn about their heritage. Genealogists built a massive family tree, branch by branch, leaf by leaf. They traced the lineage down to 2 brothers who lived in Tacoma in the 80s. One of them was named Gary. Now the police had a name, but they didn't have proof. They couldn't just knock on his door and ask for DNA. They needed to take it without him knowing. A surveillance team was assigned to follow Gary. He was in his 60s now. He lived a quiet life. For days, they watched him. The rain poured down on the unmarked police cars. They watched him go to work. They watched him go to the store. They needed something he touched. Anything. A cup. A straw. A cigarette butt. But Gary was careful. He didn't litter. Finally, on a Tuesday afternoon, Gary went to a casual family restaurant. Detectives sat at a table nearby, pretending to be customers. The tension was high. The clinking of silverware sounded like thunder to them. Gary ordered a meal. He ate slowly. He talked to the waitress. He looked relaxed. Then he did it. He took a white paper napkin. He wiped his mouth. He crumpled it up. He left it on the table. He paid his bill and walked out into the rain. As soon as Gary's car left the parking lot, the detectives moved. They approached the table before the busboy could clear it. They carefully picked up the crumpled napkin with gloved hands. It was just a piece of paper to everyone else, but to the detectives, it was the final piece of a 30-year puzzle. They placed it in an evidence bag. "We got it," one of them whispered. The lab expedited the test. They extracted the DNA from the saliva on the napkin. They compared it to the frozen sample from the park in 1986. The computer screen flashed the result. Match. The probability was 1 in a quintillion. The ghost of 1986 was Gary. They arrested him at his home. He was shocked. He looked like a confused grandfather. He thought enough time had passed. He thought the rain had hidden him. But DNA doesn't forget. It doesn't age. The detectives finally closed the file. The photo on the retired detective's desk could finally be put away. The streets of Seattle are wet and dark. The case is closed. The city sleeps a little safer tonight. The truth was hidden in the smallest of things, a napkin, a drop, a memory. In a city of 4 million people, it is easy to disappear. You can be a neighbor, a mechanic, a friendly face at the grocery store. For 25 years, a shadow haunted the streets of Los Angeles. The police called him the sleeper because he would vanish for years, only to wake up and strike again. He knew how to clean a crime scene. He knew how to avoid fingerprints. He survived the 80s. He survived the 90s. He watched the world turn digital while he stayed analog. He thought he was invisible, but he didn't understand that biology is a trap that never closes until it does. He spent decades hiding from the police, but in the end, he wasn't caught by a gun, or a witness, or a confession. He was caught by a birthday party and a leftover slice of pizza. Let us go to the concrete jungle of South Los Angeles. The year was 2010. The case files of the sleeper were stacked high in the cold case unit. Detectives had DNA from the crime scenes dating back to 1985. But they had a problem. The killer's DNA profile was not in the Cody's database. He had never been arrested for a felony. He was a ghost in the system. The detectives were desperate. They decided to try a controversial and cutting-edge technique, familial DNA search. Standard DNA testing looks for an exact match. It's like looking for a specific book in a library. Familial DNA is different. It looks for a similar book. They ran the killer's DNA again, specifically looking for a partial match. A son, a father, or a brother who was in the prison system. The computer churned through millions of profiles. And then a ping. It wasn't the killer. It was a young man who had been arrested recently on a weapons charge. His DNA was a 50% match to the serial killer. This meant the young man was likely the son of the monster they were hunting. The detectives looked at the young man's birth certificate. They found his father's name, Lonnie, a retired mechanic, a man who was known in his neighborhood for fixing cars and being helpful, a man who had lived in the center of the killing zone for 30 years. Now they had a name, but in the American justice system, a familial match is not enough to arrest someone. It's just a lead. They needed Lonnie's direct DNA to prove he was the one. They couldn't ask him for it. If they tipped him off, he might destroy evidence or run. So, the LAPD set up a massive, silent surveillance operation. For weeks, undercover officers watched his house. They watched him work on cars. They watched him talk to neighbors. They needed his genetic trash. A cigarette butt, a soda can, a tissue. But Lonnie was frustratingly clean. He didn't smoke outside. He didn't eat in his car. The detectives were running out of time and budget. Then they got a break. Lonnie was planning to go to a birthday party at a local pizza restaurant. This was their chance. The police sent in an undercover team. They didn't dress like cops. They dressed like customers. They dressed like busboys. The restaurant was loud, filled with laughter and music. Lonnie sat at a long table, surrounded by friends. He looked like a normal grandfather. The undercover officers sat at the next table, their hearts pounding. They had to wait. They had to be patient. If they moved too soon, they would blow the whole operation. Lonnie ordered pizza, salad, soda. He ate slowly. Every time he touched a fork, the detectives watched. Every time he wiped his mouth, they took a mental note. Finally, Lonnie finished his meal. He pushed his plate away. On the plate was a single pizza crust, the edge of the slice, chewed and discarded. He also left a used napkin and a plastic cup. Lonnie stood up. He hugged his friends. He walked out of the restaurant, completely unaware that the waiter clearing his table was a detective. The waiter moved fast. He didn't just dump the table into a bin. He carefully, surgically, placed the pizza crust, the napkin, and the cup into separate evidence bags. They were driven immediately to the crime lab. The forensic scientists didn't sleep that night. They swabbed the saliva from the bite marks on the pizza crust. They extracted the DNA. They placed the profile side by side with the DNA found at a crime scene from 1987. The screen turned green. It was him, the mechanic, the neighbor, the ghost. The DNA from the pizza crust was an exact match to the killer who had evaded justice for 25 years. The probability was 1 in 6 quadrillion. The next morning, the sun rose over Los Angeles. But for Lonnie, the world went dark. A SWAT team surrounded his house. When he walked out to get his morning paper, he was met by 20 guns. He didn't fight. He knew. When they interrogated him, he stared at the wall. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. He thought the gap in time was a shield. But he forgot that he leaves a piece of himself on everything he touches, even a slice of pizza. The streets of Los Angeles are vast, but the net is tight. The sleeper is gone. The neighborhood is safe. The technology that caught him is silent, invisible, and patient. The shopping mall. In 1979, it was the center of the American universe, a place of bright lights, new clothes, and endless possibilities. But when the lights go out and the doors lock, the parking lot becomes a different world, a vast ocean of asphalt and shadows. On a freezing December night in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 18-year-old Michelle drove her family's big Buick into that ocean and never drove out. For 39 years, her car sat in the police impound, a frozen time capsule of a tragedy. The killer walked free. He lived a successful life. He was a respected businessman in the same town. He thought the secret was safe in the past, but he didn't count on the future. He didn't know that almost 4 decades later, his freedom would end, not with a gun, but with a plastic straw in a fast food restaurant. Let us travel back to December 19th, 1979. It was 5 days before Christmas. The air in Iowa was bitter cold. Michelle Martinko was a golden girl, beautiful, talented, in the choir. She had her whole life ahead of her. She asked her father for the car keys to go to the new Westdale Mall. She wanted to buy a new winter coat. She promised to be home by 10 p.m. She walked through the mall, surrounded by holiday shoppers. She bought the coat. At 9 p.m., she walked out the doors into the dark parking lot. The mall closed. The lights dimmed. The shoppers went home, but the Buick remained. At 4 a.m., the police found the car. It was idling. The engine was running. The heater was blasting hot air. Inside, Michelle was slumped over. The scene was chaotic, but there was one strange detail. On the gear shift, there was blood. Not Michelle's blood. The killer had cut himself during the struggle. In 1979, the police collected it. They typed it. Blood type O. But that was useless. Millions of people have type O blood. They had a ghost with a blood type, but no face. The years rolled by. The 80s brought new music. The 90s brought the internet. The mall began to age. The stores changed. The detectives interviewed everyone. Ex-boyfriends. Strange men seen in the mall. They even used a psychic at one point. Nothing worked. The killer was a nice guy. He wasn't on the police radar. He was Jerry, a man who worked in IT, a man who smiled at neighbors. He lived his life quietly, while Michelle's parents grew old and passed away without knowing the truth. The case became a legend in Iowa. The mall murder. In 2006, cold case detectives discovered something amazing. The blood sample from the gear shift had been preserved perfectly. They extracted a full DNA profile. They ran it through the National Criminal Database. 0 matches. Jerry had never been arrested. He had never given his DNA to the government. Another decade passed. Then, in 2018, the Golden State Killer was caught using genetic genealogy. The Iowa detectives realized, this is our chance. They uploaded the killer's DNA profile to a public ancestry site. They found a distant cousin, a woman in Vancouver. They built the family tree backward to the 1800s, then forward again to 1979. It was a massive puzzle of names and dates. Eventually, the tree narrowed down to one branch, a family named Burns. There were 3 brothers. All lived in Iowa in 1979. One of them was Jerry Burns. Now it was 2018, 39 years after the murder. Detectives started following Jerry. He was 64 years old now, a grandfather. He looked harmless. They followed him to a Pizza Ranch restaurant. The detective sat a few tables away, watching him eat lunch with his son. It was a surreal moment. The man eating pizza was possibly the monster who haunted the mall in 1979. Jerry finished his soda. He drank the last drop through a clear plastic straw. He stood up, wiped his hands, and left the restaurant. He left the straw in the cup. The detective waited for the door to close. He walked over to the table. He put on a glove. He picked up the straw. That small piece of plastic held the answer to a 40-year-old question. They rushed it to the lab. The DNA on the straw was compared to the blood on the gear shift from the Buick. The call came in. It was a match. The probability that it was a random person was less than 1 in 100 billion. The police went to Jerry's office. He was sitting at his computer, working. When they asked him about 1979, he denied everything. He said he didn't remember. But when they showed him the DNA results, he went silent. The technology of the future had reached back in time and grabbed him. The Buick is gone. The mall has been demolished. But the truth stands firm. Michelle finally got her justice. The long winter is over. Trust is a dangerous thing. We trust the people we see every day. The mailman, the neighbor, the delivery driver who brings fresh bread to the store. For 28 years, Timothy Bass was a ghost hiding in plain sight. He was a family man, a hard worker, a baker who delivered food to the community. He watched the seasons change in the quiet town of Acme, Washington. He watched the police search for a killer, knowing they would never find him, because he never made a mistake. He never left a fingerprint. He never spoke a word. But secrets have a weight, and even ghosts get thirsty. Timothy didn't know that his downfall wouldn't come from a detective with a badge. It would come from a woman working the shift alongside him, and a discarded can of Coke. Let us travel back to November 1989, Thanksgiving weekend. The air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Mandy, a bright 18-year-old college student, was home for the holidays. She loved the outdoors. She went for a jog along the river road, accompanied by her family's German shepherd, Kyra. The dog returned home alone. Mandy did not. The community of Acme is small. Everyone knows everyone. Hundreds of volunteers searched the woods. They walked shoulder to shoulder through the freezing rain. 3 days later, they found her in the river. It was a tragedy that silenced the town. Detectives collected DNA evidence, but in 1989, it was just a biological sample, a silent code that no one could read yet. The years dragged on. 1990, 1995, 2005, the detective in charge, Kevin Bohe, refused to let the case die. He kept a file on his desk. He sent the DNA to the lab every time the technology improved. Eventually, they built a profile of the killer, but they had no name to match it to. They interviewed hundreds of men in the area. They asked for voluntary DNA samples. Many gave them. Some refused. One of the men who refused was a delivery driver named Timothy Bass. He lived just down the road from Mandy's house, but refusing a DNA test isn't a crime. The police couldn't force him. Without probable cause, Timothy remained a free man. By 2013, Timothy was working at a local bakery outlet. He was a manager, respected, but the detectives were watching him. They had a hunch, but a hunch isn't evidence. They needed his DNA to compare it to the sample from 1989. They tried to follow him, hoping he would spit on the sidewalk or drop a cigarette. But Timothy was unnaturally careful. He never littered. He wore gloves. He seemed to know he was being hunted. The police were stuck. They needed help from the inside. Detective Bohe decided to take a risk. He visited the bakery. He didn't talk to Timothy. He talked to a manager named Kim. He told her, "We are investigating an old case. We suspect your co-worker, Timothy, but we can't prove it without his DNA." Kim was shocked. She had worked with Timothy for years. He was odd, yes, but a killer? The detective asked her a difficult question. "Can you help us get something he drank from?" Kim was terrified. If Timothy was innocent, she would be betraying a colleague. If he was guilty, she would be working alone with a monster. She asked for time to think. Kim went to work the next day. She watched Timothy. She noticed how careful he was. He kept his personal items close. But everyone has a routine. Timothy loved Coca-Cola. He drank it every day. And unlike most people who throw their cans in the trash, Timothy usually took his trash home with him. Kim realized she had to be fast. Months passed. The opportunity never came. Until one day in August 2017, 28 years after the murder, Timothy was thirsty. He opened a can of Coke. He drank it. Then, he got distracted by a delivery order. He crumpled the can and threw it into the bakery's trash bin, something he rarely did. Kim's heart was pounding in her chest. She waited for Timothy to leave the room. She put on a glove. She reached into the trash bin. She grabbed the cold, aluminum can. It was just a piece of trash, but to her it felt heavy. She hid it. Later that day, she met the detective in a parking lot. She handed him the can in an evidence bag. "Here," she said. "I hope this is it." The lab technicians went to work. They swabbed the lip of the can. They extracted the saliva. They ran the profile against the sample found in the river in 1989. The computer screen flashed the result. 1 in 11 quadrillion. It was a match. The delivery driver, the neighbor, the baker. He had been living his life, raising a family, driving past the crime scene every single day for 3 decades. When the police arrested Timothy, he denied everything. He claimed he didn't know her. But science doesn't lie. The family of Mandy Stavik finally got the call they had waited for since that rainy Thanksgiving in 1989. "We got him." The river flows on. The trees keep their watch. But the shadow has been lifted from the valley. The baker's secret was revealed by the courage of a friend and a simple can of soda. Justice has no expiration date. In the depths of a Minnesota winter, the cold doesn't just freeze water. It freezes time. It preserves things. A footprint in the snow. A memory in a community. A secret in a heart. For 25 years, the city of Minneapolis was haunted by a ghost in a red winter coat. Sarah, a young nurse dedicated to saving lives, vanished on a night when the temperature dropped to 20 below zero. Her killer was not a stranger hiding in the shadows. He was a pillar of the community, a man who taught children discipline and teamwork, a local hero who was cheered in crowded stadiums. He thought his reputation was a shield. He thought the ice had buried his crime forever, but he forgot that even the deepest freeze eventually thaws. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't come from a grand confession. It came from a simple, messy napkin tossed into a trash can at a high school hockey game. Let us travel back to the winter of 1993. Minneapolis, the city of lakes. It was a brutal winter, the kind where the air hurts your face. Sarah Hansen was 24. She worked a night shift at the university hospital. She was kind, reliable, the type of person who always brought coffee for her co-workers. On the night of February 12th, she finished her shift at 3 a.m. She walked to her car in the employee parking ramp. The security cameras were frozen. The parking lot was deserted. She never made it home. At 5 a.m., a snowplow driver noticed her car. It was running. The headlights were on, cutting through the ice fog. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. Sarah's purse was on the passenger seat. Her keys were in the ignition, but Sarah was gone. The police arrived and found a scene frozen in time. There were signs of a struggle in the snow next to the car, but the fresh powder was already covering them. 100 yards away, near a chain-link fence, they found her red scarf. On the scarf, there was a tiny, almost invisible speck of blood. Not hers. In 1993, they collected it carefully. They knew it was important, but they didn't have the tools to read its secrets yet. They placed the scarf in a brown evidence bag and put it in a freezer. Months turned into years. The snow melted. Summer came, and winter returned. The case grew cold. Sarah became a photo on a missing person poster that slowly faded in the sun. The killer remained free. His name was Mark. He was a beloved high school hockey coach. He was the kind of man everyone trusted. Fathers wanted their sons to be like him. Mothers felt safe leaving their kids with him. He lived a normal life. He won championships. He retired with honors. He walked past the missing posters of Sarah and felt nothing but relief. He thought he had gotten away with the perfect crime because he was a good guy. 2.5 decades passed. 2018 arrived. Cold case detectives decided to try the new technique that was solving impossible cases nationwide: genetic genealogy. They took the microscopic speck of blood from the red scarf frozen in 1993. They built a DNA profile. They uploaded it to a public ancestry database. There was no direct match. Mark had never been arrested, but there were distant cousins, people who had submitted their DNA to find out their heritage. The genealogists began the painstaking work of building a family tree backward to the 1800s, and then forward again to the present day. It took months. Finally, the tree pointed to one specific branch of a family living in Minneapolis. There were 3 brothers. 2 were accounted for on the night of the murder. The third was Mark, the hockey coach. The detectives were shocked. Coach Mark, the local legend, they couldn't just arrest him based on a family tree. They needed his direct DNA to compare to the blood on the scarf. They set up a surveillance operation. It was winter again in Minneapolis. The detectives sat in freezing unmarked cars, watching a man in his late 60s live a quiet retirement. They needed him to discard something organic: spittle, sweat, hair. But Mark was neat. He didn't spit. He wore hats. They learned he was going to attend a big high school hockey game at the local arena. He was going to be honored before the game. This was their chance. Detectives dressed in plain clothes spread out through the arena. The smell of popcorn and hot chocolate filled the air. The sound of the crowd was deafening. Mark sat in the stands, waving to people. During the intermission, he went to the concession stand. He bought a hot dog with mustard and a soda. The detectives watched, their hearts pounding, from 3 rows back. Mark ate the hot dog. He got some mustard on his fingers. He took a coarse, brown paper napkin dispenser. He wiped his mouth. He wiped his fingers. He crumpled the napkin into a ball. As he walked back to his seat, he casually tossed the napkin into an overflowing garbage can near the exit. A detective moved instantly. He pretended to tie his shoe near the garbage can. With a gloved hand, hidden by his body, he reached into the trash and grabbed the specific crumpled napkin. It was warm from Mark's hands. It had mustard on it, and crucially, saliva. They rushed it to the state crime lab. The forensic scientists worked through the night. They extracted the DNA from the napkin. They compared it to the blood from the scarf found in the snow in 1993. The computer confirmed it. It was a perfect match. The blood on the scarf belonged to the beloved hockey coach. The community was shattered when the news broke. They couldn't believe that the monster they feared was the hero they cheered. Mark was arrested quietly at his home. The facade of the good guy melted away instantly. The ice has finally given up its secret. The red scarf is no longer just evidence. It is a symbol of truth waiting to be found. Sarah's family finally has answers. We spend 1/3 of our lives asleep, vulnerable, unconscious. For Dr. Arthur Sterling, sleep was a medical condition. He suffered from severe sleep apnea. Without his machine, he stopped breathing. On the night of January 24th, Arthur told police he was strapped into his life support machine, deep in a medically induced slumber. while an intruder murdered his wife, Claire, in the living room downstairs. He claimed the machine's white noise masked her screams. He claimed the data would prove he never left his bed. It seemed like the perfect, ironclad medical alibi. But Arthur forgot that the machine doesn't just pump air. It records it. It listens to the rhythm of your lungs. And on that night, the machine recorded a breath that wasn't human. Let us travel to the high Sierras, on the border of California and Nevada. Lake Tahoe is a playground for the wealthy, a place of stunning beauty and dangerous isolation. The Sterling Lodge was a fortress of timber and stone. Arthur was a respected cardiologist. Claire was a former pharmaceutical rep who managed their investments. Behind the closed doors of the lodge, the marriage was freezing over faster than the lake outside. Claire had discovered Arthur was moving funds into hidden accounts. She threatened to expose him to the medical board. Arthur knew a divorce would ruin his reputation and his fortune. He needed a solution that looked like a tragedy. The blizzard was historic. Roads were closed. Power lines were flickering. Arthur called 911 at 3:15 a.m. His voice was calm, almost groggy. "I just woke up," he said. "I went downstairs for water. My wife, she's on the floor. There's glass everywhere." When the sheriff's deputies arrived on snowmobiles, they found a scene of chaos. The sliding glass door was shattered. The safe was open and empty. Claire was gone. Arthur sat on the stairs, wearing his pajamas, looking shocked. "I didn't hear a thing," he repeated. "I wear a CPAP mask. It makes a loud rushing noise. I took a sleeping pill at 10 p.m. and was out cold until 3 a.m. The detective in charge, Sergeant Miller, was skeptical. The intruder had walked through deep snow, but left very confusing tracks that seemed to circle back to the garage. However, Arthur's alibi was scientifically robust. He handed Miller the SD card from his CPAP machine. "Analyze it," Arthur said confidently. "It records every minute of usage. You'll see I was wearing the mask from 10:15 p.m. to 3:10 a.m. continuously." Miller sent the card to a sleep specialist for forensic analysis. The initial report came back confirming Arthur's story. The log showed the device was on and pressurized for the entire 5-hour window during the murder. It looked like Arthur was telling the truth. He was tethered to his bed the whole time. But the case nagged at Miller. The snow tracks didn't make sense. He decided to send the data to the manufacturer of the device, asking for a level 2 breath-by-breath analysis. Standard logs just show if the machine is on. Advanced logs show the physics of the air. The engineer from the company called Miller back 2 days later. "Detective," the engineer said, "we have a problem with this data." The machine was on, the engineer explained. The pressure was constant, but the flow rate is impossible. He explained that when a human sleeps, their breathing is irregular. We sigh, we shift, we breathe faster during REM sleep and slower during deep sleep. The data from 10:15 p.m. to 1 a.m. looked normal, chaotic human breathing, but at 1 a.m., the estimated time of the murder, the data changed. For exactly 45 minutes, from 1 a.m. to 1:45 a.m., the airflow became perfectly flat. Zero variation, zero snoring, zero sighs. The resistance was there, meaning the mask was sealed against something, but that something wasn't breathing. The engineer's conclusion was chilling. This pattern happens when you strap the mask onto a dense object, like a bowling ball or a firm pillow, he said. It tricks the machine into thinking it's on a face, so it keeps running and logging usage time. But there's no respiratory exchange. Arthur hadn't slept through the murder. At 1 a.m., He had woken up. He took the mask off his face. He carefully strapped it around his firm memory foam pillow to keep the sensors engaged and the data logging. Then, he slipped out of the bedroom. He went downstairs. He silenced Claire. He staged the robbery. He broke the glass. He walked outside in the snow to fake the tracks. Then, at 1:45 a.m., he returned to the bedroom. He took the mask off the pillow and put it back on his face, resuming his human breathing data until he woke up at 3:15 a.m. to call the police. Arthur thought he understood the technology because he was a doctor. He knew the machine logged hours, but he didn't know it logged the chaos of life. He tried to simulate sleep with a pillow, but he only simulated death. A perfect, flat, breathless line on a graph. When Miller laid the graph on the interrogation table, Arthur stopped breathing for a moment, this time for real. The red line showed the pillow gap clearly. "You can't fake biology, Doctor," Miller said. "Your alibi didn't just prove you were asleep. It proved exactly when you were awake enough to kill." Arthur Sterling was arrested. The lodge was seized. The machine that was supposed to save his life ended his freedom. The snow has covered the tracks at the lodge. The lake is calm and dark. The technology is silent. Some journeys have a beginning, but no end. In November 1987, a young couple boarded a ferry in Canada, heading south into the rainy darkness of Washington state. They were running a simple errand. It was supposed to take one night, but they drove off the ramp and vanished into the mist. For 31 years, their families waited. The police found a van. They found the bodies miles apart in the deep woods. But the killer was a ghost. He left no fingerprints. He had no motive. He was a shadow that moved through the trees and then disappeared back into his ordinary life. He thought that time was on his side. He didn't know that 3 decades later, a computer would do the impossible. It would look at a microscopic drop of his DNA and draw his face. Let us travel to the damp, green world of the Pacific Northwest. Jay Cook and Tanya Van Queilenborg were young, in love, and full of life. Jay was 20. Tanya was 18. On November 18, 1987, they borrowed a bronze Ford van to drive from Victoria, British Columbia, to Seattle to pick up furnace parts for Jay's father. It was a dark, stormy night, typical for November in the Northwest. They took the ferry across the Strait of Juan de Fuca. They were seen buying tickets. They were seen driving off the boat. And then silence. When they didn't return the next day, their families panicked. This wasn't like them. A week later, Tanya's body was found in a ditch in a rural wooded area, miles from the highway. 2 days after that, Jay was found under a bridge 40 miles away. The van was found abandoned in downtown Bellingham, hidden in a parking lot. The police found DNA evidence in the van, a specific biological profile that didn't belong to Jay or Tanya. But in 1987, the database was empty. The profile sat in a file folder, a string of numbers with no name. The case haunted the region. It was known as the Sweetheart Murders. Detectives chased thousands of leads. They received tips about drifters, serial killers, and escapees. But the DNA cleared everyone. The killer was living among them. He was William, a construction worker and truck driver. He lived a quiet life, just a few miles from where the bodies were found. He hiked the same trails. He drove the same wet roads. He watched the news reports fade away. He thought he was safe because he had never been arrested. His DNA wasn't in the system. 30 years passed. The year was 2018. Detective Scharf, who had inherited the cold case, decided to try something radical. He hired a company called Parabon Nanolabs. They used a new technology called DNA phenotyping. Instead of just matching DNA, they used algorithms to predict physical traits from the genetic code. The computer analyzed the killer's 30-year-old DNA and generated a picture. It predicted his eye color, hair color, skin tone, and face shape. It produced a snapshot, a digital portrait of a man no one had ever seen. It showed a man with fair skin, greenish hazel eyes, and a specific jawline. But a picture isn't a name. So, they took the next step, genetic genealogy. They built a family tree. It led them to the Talbot family. And right there, on one of the branches, was William Talbot too. He was 55 years old now. He lived in SeaTac, Washington. He matched the snapshot perfectly. The eyes, the chin, the age. But the detectives needed to be 100% sure. They needed his DNA to compare to the crime scene. William was a trucker. He was always on the move. Surveillance teams followed him for days. It was May 2018. The spring rain was falling. They watched him driving his truck through the industrial areas of Seattle. He stopped at a convenience store. He bought a coffee. The detectives watched from across the street, tense, waiting. William walked back to his truck. He drank the coffee, but he didn't throw the cup away there. He got in his truck and drove off. The detectives had to follow him for miles. Finally, while driving, William rolled down his window. He tossed the empty cup out onto the roadside. As soon as the truck was out of sight, the detectives pulled over. They ran into the tall grass on the side of the road. They found the cup. It was wet from the rain, but the rim was dry enough. They rushed it to the lab. The DNA on the coffee cup was a perfect match to the DNA found in the bronze van in 1987. They arrested William Talbot on his way to work. He was stunned. He thought the rain and the years had washed away his connection to that night. But the science had seen his face before the police ever did. The families of Jay and Tanya, who had waited 31 years, finally got the call. The journey was over. The woods of Washington are quiet now. The fog lifts from the road. The mystery that hung over the Northwest is solved. The shadow is gone. And you are safe from the long, dark road. You are home. You are warm. The rain outside is just water. It cannot hurt you. Listen to the sound of the falling drops, washing the world clean. Let your eyes get heavy. Let your breathing slow down. Drift away into the mist. Sleep now. Deep sleep. Good night. We have traveled a long way tonight, from the frozen lakes of the north to the rainy coast of the west. We've seen that no matter how much time passes, and no matter how cold the trail gets, the truth always finds a way to the surface. You have walked through these dark stories, and now you have reached the other side. You are safe here. The bad chapters are closed. The books are put away. If you found comfort in the rain tonight, and if you want to return to this safe place for more stories of justice and silence, please consider clicking the subscribe button. It helps our small community grow in the dark. And if you are still awake, leave a gentle like, just to let me know you were here. But for now, there is nothing left to do. Let the sound of the storm outside protect you. Let the heavy blanket of sleep cover you. You are exactly where you need to be. Drift away. Sleep well. And good night.